Hi, my name is Rich Foreman, and I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to talk about how you, as a non-technical person, can create your own minimum viable product. And just before I start, I'm going to do some housekeeping. Everyone is muted. Please ask questions using the Q&A, and the questions will be answered at the end. And this presentation will be recorded and sent out to you afterwards, so you can refer to it later. So for this presentation, I'm going to assume that you have an idea for a startup and you're not technical and you may be financially challenged. So at the end of this presentation, my goal is for you to have some different strategies for you to create your own MVP. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. First, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm going to talk about what is a minimum viable product, the MVP process, the different types of MVPs, the process of building a functional MVP, and then I'll end with some parting advice. And finally, we'll do Q&A. So let me introduce you. Let me introduce myself. My name is Rich Foreman again, and I describe myself as a serial entrepreneur. I started my entrepreneurial journey with an app development company called Apptology in 2010. And since then, I've had 2 exits. I'm highly connected to the Sacramento startup ecosystem where I run Startup Grind, Startup Folsom, and MedStart. And Sacramento is about 2 hours east of Silicon Valley. And currently I'm working on 2 startups. One's a medical startup and the other is an AI startup. I feel every founder should have an AI startup. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is based on my experience running Apptology, where my team and I have literally developed over 500 apps since 2010. We learned a lot from our customers' successes, and more importantly, we learned a lot from their failures. So what is an MVP? And before I start, before I start on what it is, I'm gonna pause here for a commentary. Entrepreneurship is an experiment. You have a hypothesis that solving a problem will make you money. And this is where the MVP comes to play. You want to build something quickly and inexpensively to test your hypothesis. The main purpose of an MVP is to test features and get feedback. And your ultimate goal is to achieve product market fit. That's not only where your customers want to buy your product, but they're willing to promote it to others. It's an iterative process. You build your MVP, get feedback, learn from it, and then rework your MVP. And I'm sure you heard the Silicon Valley mantra, fail fast, fail often. This being the case, your MVP should be quick to develop and inexpensive. So let's discuss the MVP process. And before I actually discuss it, I'm going to talk about my failure. And I think, like I said earlier, you learn a lot more from failure. And I'll talk about how I didn't follow the MVP process, and that kind of led to my failure. So one of the first startups I created was something called Ready Edition. It was a platform made for the publishing industry, and it was to provide them a companion app for their magazine or newspaper. And I think I roughly spent about 50K on this. And it failed horribly. Our target customers didn't want it. Customers that were interested thought our product was too primitive. And when I look back, I really had little understanding of the publishing industry, and my research into the industry was only cursory. And you know how they say passion is important. In hindsight, I could have reworked on reiterating the product, but I found I actually didn't really care for the industry, and I finally just walked away from the whole project altogether. So here's the MVP process. You want to do your research. You want to develop a business plan, create a product process flow. Then based on that, create your MVP features, build your MVP, and reiterate. So in terms of doing your market research, this is super important. This is what I didn't do in my first startup. I didn't thoroughly research the market. So you really have to know the issues they face, understand the competitive landscape, understand the market size, and understand the problem that you're trying to solve. And the other thing I actually have to stress is you got to walk away from your computer. You got to stay away from just doing the Google search. You need to talk and interview potential customers to understand it. And I think I did talk to a couple, but I've seen, if you go to an accelerator or a startup challenge, they tell you to actually, talk to scores, if not hundreds of customers, potential customers, so you understand the market. And I actually think, a lot of the innovations come from people that are in industry. So if you are in the industry, in some ways, you don't actually have to really sufficiently do as much research because you've been living the problem. And that's why I think a lot of innovation comes from people that are already in whatever industry they're trying to, whatever problem they're trying to solve in the industry. You want to develop a plan. The old, way back when I was a dinosaur, it used to be a business plan was like a 100-page document, and that's become passe. The business model Canva has become the standard for most incubators and accelerators. And you could actually, if you want to get information, just Google business model Canva. And so the next step I say is you need to develop a process flow. So my undergraduate degree was in industrial engineering, and we did a lot of process flows. So you would take, my suggestion is actually do a process flow of whatever the current problem is or the current process is, and identify the problem, and then create another process flow where your solution, where your solution, takes to play. And then then you can see the difference between the current flow and the new proposed process flow. And based on that process flow, you basically can determine the features that you need. And I would stick to the philosophy of only adding the needed features. The more features you add, the more time and money it could potentially be, and it could be building something that your customers don't need. Finally, you want to start building your MVP, and I'll discuss this more in the next section. And the fifth process is to reiterate: build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn. And if you think about it, for successful products, this doesn't stop. Apple is currently on the iPhone 16, and the cycle continues: build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn. Again, the goal is product market fit. When you have, and that's when you have customers that are not only willing to buy it, but they will recommend it to others. So let's go over the different types of MVPs. And I'm going to distinguish. There's low fidelity MVP, which I actually would describe as part of your market research. And there's high fidelity MVP, which I would describe as being somewhat functional. So let's talk about the low fidelity MVP. One example is the explainer video. So the founder of Dropbox was actually working on a functional MVP, but it still had a lot of issues and bugs. And so what he ended up doing was creating an explainer video. And this was, he actually used this explainer video to get into YC, and YC is like the premier accelerator. And this explainer video was also enough to get him significant investment. And as you know, Dropbox is actually one of the unicorns. I think you can call it a startup, but a startup that became a unicorn. Another way to do this is basically with a landing page. So here's an example. The founder of Buffer started with only a landing page where he described the product, the features of his products, like you can see in this screenshot. And he tweeted this out. And then if you actually hit that button that says plans and pricing, it basically had a message something like, this is still in development, but if you're interested, please leave your contact information. And based off this, the response that he got from this, this MVP, he started working on the functional MVP. And if you decide to go this route, I actually highly recommend using a product called Card. They have an inexpensive and simple product to launch a landing page. I think if you want to just do one landing page, it's like $20 a year. I have like the highest level where it's like $80 a year, and I've got like something like 80 landing pages that I could create. And then I'm going to go with another example, and it's basically a mock-up. So this is Sonny Mayugba, and he started a startup called Requested, and it was actually acquired by another company called Waiter. And this was a food delivery company, and they actually went IPO, and I think he had something like a $300 million exit, so it was very successful. And his MVP was just a sketch. He had a notebook where he sketched out his app, and he would show the flow of his app. So he would say, you touch this button, you go to this screen. And using this MVP, he was actually able to recruit a developer. From that beginning, he literally went from idea to IPO. One step of the sketch mockup is what I call a tappable mockup. So what you could do is, this is actually what you would do if you're going to actually develop an app. You start off with a wireframe, and then you have a UI designer create the UI. And then if you're using something like Figma, you could actually stitch it into something that, is what I call a tappable mockup. And if you don't, if you created it if you created the wireframe, the user interface in another platform, you could use a platform called Marvel to stitch together. So these are the products. So if your designer is already doing in Figma, problem solved, you could actually create a tappable mockup. If you use something else, you could use a product called Marvel, which will stitch it together. So let's talk about high fidelity MVPs, which have some functionality. And the first one I'm going to talk about is the concierge MVP. And this is where the service is manually delivered by the startup. And this picture here is a startup called Japa, which was started by UC Davis students. And UC Davis is a college, a UC college here near Sacramento. And what they did was what their startup is they were putting sensors in each parking space, and people could find their empty space using the app. And to prove the hypothesis that people would pay for the service, during a big event they have at UC Davis called Picnic Day, they dressed up as parking cones and parking pin drops, and they would direct cars to empty spaces. And when they finally then when they would talk to the customer, and they said, was this useful to you? And the customer said, definitely, this was useful to you. And based on this feedback, that's when they started working on the functional MVP. Another example of a more traditional method of examples, basically of a concierge MVP, is what Airbnb did. So what Airbnb did when they first started is they essentially had an empty room, and they put a mattress in it, and they actually put up this web page and started marketing it. And the web page actually had no e-commerce or anything like that. It just basically had their cell numbers and their emails, and people would reach out. So their hypothesis they were testing was, would people be willing to pay a stranger to stay in their room? And based on this MVP, that's when they started. And as you know now, Airbnb is like just a juggernaut in the for lack of a better word, the hotel space. Another example is the Wizard of Oz MVP. And if you actually saw the movie Wizard of Oz, the Wizard of Oz was this basically essentially this puppet and then the back was basically controlled by a dude in the back. And the MVP is just a facade. And so a great example of that is Zappos. So when Zappos started, they had a hypothesis. Would people be willing to buy shoes? Would people be willing to buy shoes online? So they created this website here, but it was functional. It actually had an e-commerce engine. And they would take the products was just pictures they would take of shoes at a local shoe store. And so whenever a pair of shoes was bought, they would go to the shoe store, buy a pair, and then ship it out. And so this basically was their first hypothesis. And finally, the final method is actually creating a functional MVP. And I'm going to talk more about this in the next section. So in this section, I'm going to go over the different ways to create a functional MVP. And in this way, I'm going to basically talk about the traditional method, starting out with an existing source code and then using a no-code platform. So let's talk about building a functional MVP in the traditional method. And at a high level, it starts with creating a wireframe, developing a user interface. And you can see these two steps are the same steps I was talking about in the previous section about creating a tappable mockup. And then finally, when you have that, then you could actually the next step is actually have the developers actually build the app based off the first two steps. The other thing that's typically not seen is the backend is also required to be deployed. It's the cloud database. This is something that we typically would build on AWS. So if you think about it, Yelp, for example, basically talks to a cloud-based database. It just queries on restaurants based on types and location. So after a client's project done, we actually recommend that they budget about 20% of the project price on annual maintenance and updates. So for example, Apple and Android do major updates on the operating system. And at a minimum, you need to make sure that your app supports the current OS. And building from scratch is not cheap. If you're going to go with a third-party developer, when I would be quoted, I would actually say a minimum for my business was 20K. And I've seen projects bid it out north of $1 million. And the more complex your project is, the more time it takes. And again, I've seen the projects take, more than a year to build. And the longer it takes, the higher risk that it's going to fail. And the projects can fail for many reasons. One is developers leave, founders will also leave. I've had founders die on me, unfortunately. And then, if you're doing constant scope creep, it just basically increases the complexity and basically makes it longer. And then one of the biggest risks is you just run out of money. So another way to create an MVP is to start with an existing source code. So when I was actively promoting my app development company, Uber had just hit the scene, and there were a ton of startups that wanted to follow the Uber model. So there was the Uber for plumbers, the Uber. I mean, this is what I've been asked: the Uber for plumbers, Ubers for hair blowers, on and on and on. And if you wanted to build this from scratch, I basically would just say, oh, it's about $100,000. But there's a cheaper way to start out, and that's to use an existing source code. So if you were to Google source code marketplace or for example, Uber source code clones, you would find, basically a lot of things would show up. And then you could typically buy the source code for a lot less. I think the last time I looked at this, you could buy like the Uber source code for $10,000. But it still needs a developer. You still need a developer to actually customize it. So typically, the company you buy the source code from will do customization for it for a price. They will also you also need a developer to implement the back end, and you also need a developer to do ongoing maintenance. Both for the traditional method and source code, make sure you have the rights to the IP. So if you hire a developer or have one of the team, make sure he or she assigns the ownership of the IP to the business entity. And if you're working with a third-party developer or someone on your team, and they say no, move on. And I have a personal story that I'll talk about later, but move on. Make sure that the IP is owned by your business entity. The IP, the source code is owned by. Otherwise, you're paying somebody money, and for almost no, it's just going to be fruitless. And finally, I'm going to talk about developing a functional MVP using a no-code platform. So a no-code platform is a software development tool that allows you to create applications without writing code. And I'm going to add or little code. You should probably know a little bit of coding to effectively use a no-code platform. It's relatively inexpensive. Instead of spending tens of thousands of dollars, you could start out with a free trial by entering your credit card to a no-code platform. Apps can be built extremely fast. Several years ago, I entered a California Health Data Hackathon, and over a weekend, I built an app, an iPhone and Android app for the Sacramento County WIC office, and we actually won first prize and got the $10,000. We got the $10,000 prize. These platforms are feature rich. They support a lot of commonly used platforms, and the number of design templates you could choose from. And if you have a good designer, they could actually look really good. The other positive thing is the backend is also included, and this includes a content management system that will help you track users, send out push notifications, track analytics, etc. And the other advantage of using a no-code platform is that maintenance are typically included. And so it is a SaaS platform. And so you're going to pay a monthly fee. But part of that, what do you get back in return is maintenance is done. And the other thing, too, at least the platforms I'm familiar with, is whenever the operating systems make an update, the app update is also updated as well. So you don't actually have to, if you just want to make sure that your app is current with the current operating system, that's included in it. But let's talk about some of the limitations of these platforms. And it's kind of the strength is also the weakness. They do have limited features. There are limited design templates. The scalability can be, there could be an issue with scalability. So from a technical standpoint, these platforms can actually scale, to quite a bit, to a big number. But the problem is, it is more about the licensing model. So some of these platforms will charge you more if there's more downloads. So you want to pick a platform, at least a licensing model, where that you can actually have unlimited downloads. And the other issue is that you don't own the source code, which may not be a problem, but in the end, you don't own that source code, but you own, that app and all the revenue created by that app. And if the app doesn't support all the features, see if the app can leverage third-party integrations. Some of the platforms actually do have APIs, and that you could actually build into. And the other way around it is you could actually build a progressive web app and embed it like an iframe within the app itself. So these are other ways that you can do customization if the feature set of that platform doesn't support what you're looking for. The other thing too, so if you have a list of features and the feature set of the platform doesn't meet all of it, and you got to look at that differential. Is that additional features that doesn't fit, that doesn't work with what that isn't you're able to do on a no-code platform worth it? So, for example, I did talk to a startup. And my initial thought when I met with them was that it could be done on a no-code platform, but there was like 3 features he wanted to do that wasn't possible. And then I said, well, you could actually start your building relatively inexpensively, or you could spend tens of thousands of dollars just for those 3 features. And the more he thought about it, he goes, let's just use the no-code platform. We could always go back and look at those additional features at a future date. So I'm going to talk about a case study of using a no-code platform, and this is actually my personal experience. A few years ago, I was approached by a clinical psychologist to build him a wellness app for the Vacaville Police Department. The Vacaville Police Department is a police department right outside of Silicon Valley. And when I talked to him, I told him that what you're asking for could be built on a no-code platform, and we actually white label it and we call it Ready Built inexpensively. And I think I charged him initially only $3,000. And so after doing this, I didn't hear from him for about 6 months. And then he called me back and said, "Hey, I need another one for the Dixon Police Department." And then he called me the next month and said, "I need one for the Dixon Fire Department." And then it began to snowball. He actually asked me to join him full time. And so I put my app development business on maintenance, and I joined him full time as a CTO. And in 2 years, we built over 100 wellness apps for first responders. And our customers included CHP, CAL FIRE, and CDCR, which are big government organizations in California. And actually, what I'm really proud of is that we are aware that it's prevented 4 suicides. So we went from 0 to 4 million in ARR in 2 years, and then we got acquired by a private equity company, and we emerged into one of their portfolio companies. So if this is a method you want to try, you could Google no code app builder. And I personally use a platform called BuildFire. I have some friends that have used a platform called Bubble. And if your MVP is just essentially a website, I actually recommend Squarespace. I use Squarespace quite a bit. So when you're looking for a no-code platform, these are things you really need to look for. It needs to be cross-platform, definitely iOS and Android. But you could also look at something called a progressive web app, which allows you to have a web presence. It should have a content management system that allows you to manage the app. Look at the feature set that it provides out of the box and compare it to what your MVP features are. And then see if it has APIs. So if there are some features that you want to develop that can't be done, see if you can leverage your APIs to include it in there. And look at the support. So, if you're going to learn a new platform, and I personally, when I first used BuildFire, it was a little bit of a learning curve. But they had really good support where I would contact them, and their support people would actually ask me about their would actually walk me through how to do it. And also look at scalability. They have a couple of models where one model is actually, kind of like the more downloads you have, the more your monthly price increases. But they actually have other models that basically that doesn't charge for number of downloads. So this is my commercial here. If you are interested in building an MVP, I do recommend BuildFire. If you go there, they have consulting services to build an MVP for you, and they actually will say they'll do it for $5K. I'll do it for $4K, and then you'll have the expertise of an experienced entrepreneur that helps you out. So if you're interested, just click on or just scan this QR code. So I'm going to end with some parting advice. And remember, your goal is product market fit. That is your goal. You have to really work towards this. And if you remember my when I talk about my failure ready edition, I had terrible product market fit where I couldn't even sell I couldn't sell the product at full price. And I compare that to Cordico, where we were selling apps would cost north of $10,000 annually, and I was working 7-day weeks, 12-hour days just to keep up with demand. And when you're working that hard to keep up with demand, you've hit product market fit. I mentioned that the intellectual property, make sure that if you're doing the traditional method or the source code, that you own the IP. And one of the first projects I had was called iMother Goose. This is when the iPhone was new. I recruited a developer who didn't know how to develop an iOS. I even got him a Mac that he could work on it. We started to get some success. We actually got on TV, and then he goes, "Rich, the source code is my intellectual property." And he was right, because he was the one who coded it. He is the copyright owner, and we had not discussed the ownership of the IP. And this is another project I had to walk away from because I can't do anything because I did not own the IP. I would suggest try to solve a niche problem. And this is a logo for an app we developed a number of years ago, um, called it's an app built for longshoremen. And longshoremen are the people that actually take stuff on ships, and they take stuff on ships and take it, they take it to and from ships. And there are about 250,000 longshoremen in the United States. And back then, when we developed this app, they actually kept their hours in this notebook. And so the gentleman I was working with, he wanted to put it on an app. And to me, he was actually solving a big problem. And if you want to market to the longshoremen, I mean, they have one magazine, and where they hung up. They hung out in the union halls. So it's kind of an easy place, easy market an easy niche to market to. And if you think about it, if you only got 10% of the longshoremen, that would be 20, and he was charging 99 cents a month for his app. That's $25,000 a month of generating revenue if he only got 10% of that target group. The other thing I recommend is networking. The more people you meet, the more options you have. And there's a saying that your network is your net worth. And the main reason I'm here is because when I was networking, I met with Rob Liu, and this is like over 10 years ago. And I had this presentation. He asked me to actually present on this, present this webinar to ideas to IPO. And as you network, you have an opportunity to build your team. And once you have a good working team, it's magic. So at Cordico, we just had a great team, and we believed in the mission. We celebrated the wins. I had this like chart in my office. Whenever we got a new customer, I would fill it up like a graph, and we actually saw it go up to 1 million and eventually 4 million in 2 years. Next thing I do, and I advise this to all startups, is have a proficiency in digital marketing. So if you spend the time and energy to build a solution, and there is someone in Montana, and for those of you outside the United States, Montana is right in the middle of the United States. It's kind of a rural era, and they need your solution. What they're going to do is they're going to try to find your solution using Google. And if they can't find you, you don't exist. So you really need to have some expertise in digital marketing. And then there's this concept of calling it nailing it and scaling it. And I'm going to give 2 examples. There was a startup called Rocket Spoon. They did food. They had a kitchen and they would do food delivery. And they were a darling of YC. They raised $12 million, and they started out in Oakland, California. And they were getting pressure to scale very quickly. So they replicated their operations in San Diego and Seattle. And because they didn't, the Oakland model was still burning cash. When they replicated their models in 3 other areas, they essentially tripled their burn rate, and they went out of business. And remember, they raised 12 million. They went out of business in a year. So if before you scale it, you need to make sure that your model is profitable. The other example I use, and people don't know this, but when Amazon first started out, they only sold books. So all Amazon, I mean, now Amazon sells everything, but they needed to perfect their model, and they just used one item, and that was books. And once they finally perfected it, now they pretty much buy anything on Amazon. So at this point, I'm gonna go to Q&A, and let me look at I'm gonna pull up the Q&A. So if you have any questions, just from idea to exit. Oh, so from Samira, his name was Sunny Mayugba. He's actually a friend of mine. He's local here in Sacramento. and he actually is working on now a medical startup, and he's quite knowledgeable. And please, if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A, and if not, I could. Any other questions? All right. While they're doing that, I'm going to put in Sunny's. I'm going to go ahead and put in my LinkedIn just in case anyone wants to find me. 'Cause I don't see any questions here, so I've either really bored you guys, and I will end it if there's no Q&A. So yeah, Ozzy's asking, does Google Analytics work for digital marketing? Yes. So if you are doing digital marketing, so Google Analytics is just one tool that you need to use in digital marketing. It'll let you know how well you're doing. So when a startup I did a year ago, um, I basically started from zero with no, a website that had, no hits. And for, I was writing content on it for daily. And then and then I kept 30 days at the month mark. I remember I checked the, Google Analytics, and basically only one person that was going to the website was me. But after 6 months, I could see when we were hitting the page of the page one of several Google searches. So Google Analytics will basically um, is a tool that will help you see how you're doing in your digital marketing efforts. See, I'm interested in connecting for developing an app for your company. Yeah, so Andrew, you have my contact information. I do already have MVP. So that there's two questions I usually, when I was developing apps, two questions that I had. There were two questions I had. The number one question was, how much does it cost to build an app? And the second question is, do I have an NDA? And I do have an NDA. It's already, I have it already PDF and signed. So if you email me at rich.foreman@apptology.com, I'm happy to send you the NDA, or I'm happy to sign your NDA as well. And then I am actually to Samira's question. Let me see if I could find Sunny's information, and I'll put his LinkedIn in there. And he's a great guy. Um, let's see. Matt says GDPR and similar regulations are mental blockers for me launching anything publicly, where there's a risk of getting others' data. At what phase should a founder bring legal on? Well, remember, you don't know if whatever you're doing is going to um, work. And again, you remember Matt, so you want to get a product out there as soon as possible. So, even if you just had the mock-up, right? You don't really have to worry about GDPR because you're just at the concept start. I think maybe when you start thinking about regulations, um, that's when you probably have to bring in something or research, whatever the regulations are. But initially, don't worry about it. Don't, there's sometimes you just got to go into it and see. And remember, like my first product, if I was working on that and I started to work on, trying to make it, follow regulations, it still would have failed, and I still would have paid a lot of money. So I would say, you know, if at a minimum, just do some of the low fidelity type of MVPs just to see if people are willing to buy what you're trying to do. And then if you start getting traction and start, actually having to build a functional MVP that you want to take to market, then start looking at the regulations. But in the interim, just try it without it. Samir saying, I'm co-founding a cybersecurity company for deep tech company. It takes longer than the average working on MVP at the moment. That's probably true. It's also super competitive. And then that's something that my thought is, yeah, you're going to have to either figure out an MVP. I know there's a local person here that has his name is John Koss. He has it's a it's a it's a part of cybersecurity, and so he did build it, but it wasn't like an all-inclusive thing. But he also had before that, he actually talked to some of his potential customers before he started building it to see if this was a problem. So yeah, it does take longer than the average to work on the MVP. So Samira, the thing that you should look at is, if this is a big investment you're going to make, do the research up front, and talk to your potential customers and say, if I build this, is this something that interests you? And talk to a lot of them, because I could see, I've seen startups build, and this happens everywhere. They put in, millions of dollars on an MVP, and it fails horribly because they just don't have that. They just didn't do that research. So yeah, it's going to take a lot, but I'd say before you work on it, do a lot of the research ahead of time. And then for Samira, I was looking up Sonny, and I was gonna get his contact for you. All right, so Samira, I'm putting his LinkedIn in here. Can't do it. Oh, well. All right. All right, I guess I don't see any more questions, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop it here. And I thank you all for attending today. And you have my contact information. We will be sending out the recording of this, and you'll get the slide deck. And feel free to contact me. Even if you just have questions, I'm happy to talk to you. All right. So everybody have a great day and a great weekend.